All right, my name is Matt Young. I'm the lead brewer at Half Acre Beer Company, and I've been at the brewery for about almost 5 years now. And we take even a slightly simpler approach than Eric just talked about. And for our yeast, we don't propagate any yeast in the brewery. Oh, great. Everybody hear me? Yeah? Now we're talking? All right. So we don't do any propagation in the brewery, and we buy pitchable prop amounts from Brewing Science Institute, and we go about 10 generations on our ale yeast and 5 to 6 on our lager yeast. So our process is we will get the prop in, brew a 30-barrel batch of beer, which is the smallest batch that we can do on our new brew house. And then prop the yeast up from the 30-barrel size up to a 60-barrel size, and then step it up to a full 120, which is the largest fermenters that we have at the brewery. And that's kind of the only way that we save money in terms of not having to purchase an entire 120-barrel pitchable prop of yeast. As far as moving yeast around, all that we do is harvest yeast between days 4 and 6 of primary fermentation, and we move it from one cone to the next. And that means that we don't have a yeast brink, we don't have a propagator, and we don't have a little keg or anything. We just literally hook one end of the hose to the donor tank and one into the receiving tank, and based on volume, we move yeast into the new tank. And the way we get the volume that we want into the fermenter is, it's not an exact science for sure, but what we will do is position the racking arm in the tank that's receiving the yeast such that it's the tip of the racking arm is at the level that corresponds to the volume that we want to fill into that tank. So as yeast is entering the fermenter, the fermenter is completely closed up. So pressure is building inside that tank as yeast is going in. And you can release that pressure by opening the racking arm valve and feel a little bit of air come out. But as soon as yeast has covered the end of the racking arm, it's going to kind of block that path, and you'll find that either you'll open the racking arm valve and no air comes out, or a little bit of yeast gets kind of spit out at you. And that's kind of our indicator that we've put the amount of yeast we want into the tank. And for us, that equates to for a 120-barrel batch, that's 60 gallons of yeast. And that's a slurry that's at about 1 billion cells per mil is what we don't do regular cell counts, but we've found roughly 1 billion cells per mil of our ale yeast, which is the American ale yeast number 5. And if you do the math on that, I think it comes out to like 2 million cells per mil per degree Plato that we're pitching, which is probably higher than what you would read in a book, and maybe a lot of people do. But that ale yeast that we use seems to be really hearty, and there's not a lot of different flavors produced by over pitching it to that amount, but it ferments really fast, so that we're hitting our final gravity probably within 3 days of fermentation and finishing diacetyl kind of cleanup and conditioning by day 9 or 10. That includes a 4-day dry hop in there from day 6 to 10. And also the great thing about pitching that much, which I don't know if that's a direct relationship or not, but we see really good healthy yeast already starting to settle out by day 3 of fermentation. And that gives us, a constant source of really good fresh yeast at the bottom of our fermenters, so we don't really have any gaps in trying to either wait to dry hop a beer before we pitch from it on a later day, or just not have yeast. But that said, we're brewing 4 days a week and brewing 120 barrels a day. So if you're staggering your brews out more, you kind of have to think about the logistics of that a little bit more. We also do a lager yeast for our Pony Pilsner, and that one we pitch the same volume per barrel, but the yeast is extremely thick when we move it around. So I think it's more at about a 1.5 billion cells per mil in the slurry. So that results in our overall pitching rate being, 50% higher than our ales. And for that, we use the Augustiner lager yeast strain, and it ferments at about 53 degrees until we bump it up for a diacetyl rest at the end of fermentation, and then we even lager on top of the diacetyl rest for a couple weeks. And the total time for our Pilsner that we need to get to final gravity is maybe like 10 days. And then it stays in the tank for about 5 weeks. And we go 5 generations on that yeast. So let's see. I think that's about covers it. So if you guys have any questions for me, and I guess, or anybody else? Okay. 85%. I think it's high. Yeah. 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 The question was the attenuation that we see with the ale yeast, and it's around 85%.
So you've said you're fermenting your lagers out at 53. What are you setting for your diacetyl rest?
57.